thank you for joining us. For those that don't know me, my name's Stephen Knight. I'm the founder and CEO of Pimento. We're a network of independent agencies and consultants, and we work across all marketing sectors and offer, last count, 97 different marketing disciplines. And we've been doing it for 20 years, working with brands like yourselves, agencies from the independent sector. We're going to record this morning's session so that we can share it with people who have registered but aren't able to join us. We'll also be sharing some of this content on our YouTube channel and also through our social content. So, interesting topic, and it's great to have so many CMOs on the call today. We're going to hopefully help put to rest some of the notions and also discuss some of the current activities in the world of CMOs. So whether you are resting between gigs, currently in a CMO role within a corporate company, or whether you are looking to rise into a position as either CMO, head of marketing, marketing director, head of brand, whatever it happens to be, all of this is hopefully relevant to you. We'll look at the latest trends. We're going to be looking at the marketing landscape and how that's evolving in light of technology. And I'm joined by 4 experts who are going to help us on that journey today. We have Ed Davison, a marketing and growth consultant and CMO. Ed holds over 25 years experience working in-house for VCs, PE-backed businesses, very much at the bleeding edge of what they are looking for from a CMO. And he's worked for 5 years as a fractional CMO, head of marketing. So he's got some war wounds and lots of experience to share with us. He also hosts Great Shouts webinars, interviewing business leaders and senior marketeers, discussing the transition of going from a startup to becoming a scale-up. Caitlin Thomas is a brand and marketing consultant. She's had 30 years experience, both agency and brand side, and has worked as a marketing director with FTSE 100 firms, and has held leadership positions for both agency and client side, as I say, including Barclays, Saatchi & Saatchi, Seahor & Co, the private bank, SSC and Aviva, and most recently she led the data science and digital marketing team at Chubb, which is the posh, high-end part of the insurance market. Robin Granger is a director and founder of 1440. Robin is a director at 1440, and as I say, he's an agency. They provide intelligence support to marketing communications leaders. So they work with CMOs. They spent most of their 25-year career as a spare brain for hire, working with marketers, helping them to solve knotty problems with clear strategies and brilliant executions. In that time, he's picked up a number of awards for what they do. And they typically work on internal comms, external comms, and very much within that first 100 days of a new job. So hence he's with us today. And finally, I've got Peter Baker with us, who's director of We Are Adam. They're a leading executive search and recruitment consultancy that specializes in marketing side roles. They've been in business for 18 years. And they help, as I say, identify growth opportunities, help create and find the right talent, the very best marketing professionals. So if you are a marketing professional in this call and you're looking to be recruited, you know where to go. Okay, so we're going to dive straight in. We're going to share some data with you this morning, and we'll also be able to share it with you afterwards in the follow-up email. If you could pull all our speakers, please, into the spotlight, that would be great. But I'm going to share a slide, if you could, Teresa, that was prepared by Peter Baker, that really asks a number of questions of what's the current market, how things out there at the moment. And if you're looking for a role at the moment, perhaps this will ring true to you. So, Peter, can I bring you into the conversation if you can kind of describe what we're looking at?
Yeah, of course. So this is basically from our operations and operations director and back office regarding data that we've gathered. We do this periodically every quarter, retrospectively, for all sort of C-suite roles. So yeah, this year I will flag that we'll get onto this, but this year's been a pretty torrid year generally. So this data may look slightly different compared to previous years, but the average tenure, which is probably the most startling one, and it is probably the biggest startling bit of data we do share when we share it with multiple different companies, is the average tenure. So it has reached up to 2.4, 2.5 years in my time, but the average tenure for a CMO is obviously quite short based on probably what the impact and what they do in a particular year. So you've got 1.7 for the Northwest, 2 obviously Southeast, UK wide 1.8, and the average is 1.6. And then we've got the two other lines of basically the the turnover of staff within particular businesses across those areas as well, and then obviously one based on the CMOs. So that could be based on them leaving off their own accord, or obviously the client moving them on for whatever reason, or it's not working out. And then the biggest sectors this year that have been hiring are obviously PR and comms, agency, and renewable. So a lot of CMOs moving into those particular areas. And we found that it's been like that across the year.
Okay, and obviously that's a function of your client base as much as anything else. But what's fascinating there is that we've always speculated that the life of a CMO is a fairly short one, down to 1.7 years on average in the Northwest, sort of up there with cyclists in London. It's not a lot of time to get in there, make an impression, do a job, and then rather worryingly, nearly 20% agencies, or sorry, 20% of companies across the UK are losing their CMO within the first 12 months. So that is, again, as you rightly said, it could be CMO-led or it could be business-led. But that does, when you take into account the cost of actually recruitment, the onboarding, the investment in time and energy and bringing somebody up to speed, if you're losing the CMO 20% every 2 CMOs in the first 12 months of getting removed, as it were, that seems to be a very expensive way to go about actually recruiting.
Mm-hmm. And this data is not from this is across LinkedIn, across all the different avenues. So this is not just us. This is across the UK generally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a lot. That's a lot of data, and a big decent size of data to be able to actually come to that conclusion. Okay, well, so first of all, if you're aspiring to be a CMO, it's good to be aware of what you're looking into. If you're a current CMO, it's also quite interesting to see actually what's happened. And I think the key point you suggested there is that that's been a shift in the last couple of years. And that would suggest to me is that clients have high expectations of the impact that CMOs will make to their business. And if they don't see immediate impact, then they're likely to actually look elsewhere fairly rapidly, which is why this whole idea of actually the first 100 days becomes incredibly important. Landing a new position, and frankly, it doesn't mean just a CMO. It could be head of marketing, head of brand, marketing director, whatever it happens to be. The reality is the same. You're immediately accountable and you're expected to actually make high impact. With that in mind, I want to come to the first question, if I may. If I go to, if it's okay, if I can go to Ed on this one, what do you think are the most critical actions for a new CMO in light of this data? What do you, as a new role for you, where you've gone in there either as a full-time or maybe you work as a fractional CMO, what are you focused on?
Yeah, it's certainly more pressing for me, especially when you go into kind of fractional roles, because you've only got a certain amount of time potentially and kind of early contractual obligations. So yeah, it's certainly pressing. And hello everyone, good to see everyone. So look, for me, there's particular key areas. I think understanding the customer inside out, immediately getting to the grips with the customer, their pain points, how they operate, and the customer journey, and getting up to speed as quickly as possible on that. I think in terms of understanding the customer journey with the competitors, both direct and indirect as well, and how those competitors influence the customer, I think is important as well. But when you're in that role with that depth and understanding of the customer, I think understanding your KPIs and how the marketing KPIs that you're involved in influence the business overall, especially with other senior stakeholders and senior people is so important. I think sometimes you can go into a role and obsess about siloed KPIs or what the existing team is working on, and that potentially can be a distraction. So I think understanding where those marketing KPIs are fitting and how they're making a big impact, especially with what's going on at the early stages, I think is important as well. To that point as well, I think really early on, it's important to get some quick wins, some early wins. Now, it's not just a case of just grabbing things and naming it to yourself. I think when you join the company and when you start interacting with your team, if you can collaborate and understand, classic example of what I do is start, stop, and continue, understanding where those opportunities can be found, then showcasing how they've had a big impact. That can really build confidence within kind of senior stakeholders. and give you a little bit kind of wider permission to consider kind of wider kind of areas and kind of wider growth areas. So I think that's really important. And then I suppose last point for me, Stephen, around this be, the interactions with the team. You've got, the relationships with senior stakeholders and speaking their language. If you're, talking to the CFO rather than, either the CTO, there's going to be kind of differences in the way you approach those conversations and how you build those engagements. But I think it's so important to build that relationship with the internal team, marketing team, to understand the needs, ambitions, the holes, the kind of problems, and build confidence within that team as well. And when you do have those quick early wins, shouting out individuals within that team, I think that's really important as well, because it positions you in good stead within the marketing team itself and then the senior stakeholders. So yeah, if that makes sense, that gives a bit of an insight there. Just on mute, I think there, Stephen.
Been doing this for 5 years. Back to you, if I may, though, Peter, for a quick question. I'm going to come backwards and forwards to the nature of the market, because I'm acutely aware that obviously the market has changed in the last 18 months. And I'd just be interested to understand what is driving this. Is it because brands have lost love for CMOs and the role of marketing, or is there something else that's going
on? I think it's been, as I mentioned, I think everyone will allude to it. It's been a tricky year, which is not really something that we can affect. There's been outside sort of impacts to that, but I think from our perspective, we will work with a really diverse sort of sector. So anything from fintech startups all the way up to large sort of blue chip organizations. So we will sometimes work with smaller agencies one day and then literally huge healthcare or finance companies the next. So we'll see an array of different areas, and because we cover not just commercial and C-suite marketing and sales and obviously the commercial level roles, but we also recruit within HR. We also see we've got 4 people who specialize in the area, so we actually see the sort of trends within that before it really impacts. So we sometimes historically 2008, we saw quite a lot of HR people being brought in to make them redundant, do transformations of teams. We've not really seen that. So we've not seen that over the last 18 months. And it's probably really impacted from September last year. I would probably suggest maybe a little bit earlier. Post-COVID, everyone was hiring, everyone was moving, everyone was changing. So things were really quite buoyant. And I think the difference of that market to this market, we're probably in a market now, whereas pre-COVID, but probably because we've been through such a I suppose quite a different time post-COVID. I think the two right next to each other have maybe distorted the reality of what the market might be like. So I think we're probably back to where we were post sort of pre-COVID in terms of the market. And as I said, probably this year it's dipped off, but we do see some green shoots. So probably the last 6 or 7 weeks, we've seen more roles across all different levels. So whether that be sort of mid-level roles all the way up to CMO and up to VP level, and up to MD, sort of CTO, COO level roles. We've seen a shift. So we're hoping for quite a sort of a different look next year. But we will only see the roles that we see. So all the roles that we look at, pretty much all under an NDA and all under sort of like an assignment. So belt and braces sort of headhunt approach. So we don't see everything in the market, but we do speak to a lot of candidates across various different levels. So I think,
sorry. So as I'm trying to say, in summary, you think it's market conditions rather than something else that's going on. I wonder whether we're seeing other roles in the ascendants that might have traditionally been part of the domain of the CMO, like chief growth officer, CTO type roles, chief customer officer, new jobs perhaps that are more transformation led, perhaps taking away from the marketing requirement, or perhaps if there's an investment to be made by a company, they're more likely perhaps to put money into those areas than they are necessarily into the traditional CMO role. Is there any evidence of that?
Yeah, well, there's certainly there's so much more performance led, performance led marketing, and as you say, the more the commercial and transformation point there is, yes, definitely. So I think the more, yeah, that there is basically, yeah. I think historically, obviously, we've looked at the digital online transformation. We alluded to AI and where things are moving in terms of the automation and AI side of things. Obviously, that's evolved the role drastically over the course of the last few years. So I think you are right. I think maybe investment might be going elsewhere originally, in the short term.
Just to add to Peter's point, actually, I mean, one thing we're seeing is in a few places, organisations that had CMOs and those people move on natural attrition or whatever, what's replacing them can often be one of these novel roles pinched from the world of tech, like a chief growth officer or a chief revenue officer. And actually, the marketing role is slightly downgraded, so it's not a C-level role. It might be an SVP or an EVP type position, but it's not a seat at the boardroom table. And there's a clear line of reporting, and that changes the game, obviously, in terms of the skill set that's required and what might be expected of those people, and it's also a different set of relationships, right? It's the new perspectives, new agendas sort of come to dominate in the boardroom. Just before coming on the call, actually, to in sort of recognition of the changing sands, I was doing some look at the state of the venture capital market over the past of this year. $10 billion went into British companies during the year to date. That's an awful lot of money, an awful lot of deals, and hopefully, well, the trend from the States is that a lot of that money goes into growth generating activities, so sales, marketing, partnerships, that sort of thing, but all firmly within that marketing bailiwick. So hopefully that means that as this year goes into next year, we see some of that investment filtering through into marketing or marketing-like roles that are created as these firms with cash burning a hole in their pocket are looking for ways to spend it. And that might be one of the things that Peter's seeing in his boom in green tech marketing jobs on the slide he showed at the start.
Yeah,
Caitlin, come to you. I mean, I guess as a traditional brand marketeer, some of the businesses you work with, your last job was very much more focused on lead generation and the focus at the bottom end of the funnel. And I guess there's a meeting of the traditional role of the CMO, who increasingly is becoming also, responsible for growth and driving performance within the businesses. Can you talk to that a little bit for us and see how that role is changing and evolving?
Yeah, definitely. I think in the last role, but also, just picking up on the private equity, I've worked in a private equity environment, and you really feel the wind of having to prove your worth. Those figures of the tenure of a CMO is rather galling, and just puts emphasis on the criticality of those first 100 days to go in and really get to the bottom of the commerciality of a business. I always have that visualization of Tom Cruise in that film. Show me the money, show me the money. As an ex-ad woman, I normally park campaign activity because it is about show me the money. Where is the money being made in this business? Getting to an understanding for that and getting very, very quickly to how are you going to add value from a marketing perspective. Looking at what's gone before, I've seen in my history marketing people come in and very quickly dismiss what's gone before. I think that's a mistake. I think, look backwards, take the lesson. Where were the previous frustrations? Why did they get rid of past marketing directors or past CMOs? What were the frustrations? Understand those, get to grips with those very, very quickly. What are the expectations of your stakeholders? are those expectations reasonable? And you can only make an assessment on that, I think, if you get very quickly to a commercial understanding on how that business is making its money.
Yeah.
So I think for me that's the most critical thing is getting to grips on that, and then
do you think? Sorry, do you think as a general point, as marketeers, that we are not as well prepared as we might be when we take up some of these new positions? You know, in the time that from the initial series of interviews through to the job offer to you leaving a current position, very often that could be 6 months, 9 months even in some cases. And I just wonder how one can use your time wisely in that period to be able to actually answer some of those questions prior to actually dropping into that organization. It's often quite difficult because you're obviously working out an existing role. But maybe this is something where the recruiters can be more supportive in actually preparing and giving advice and soundings and giving you the opportunity to have wider interviews with your prospect new job.
I normally find that when I ask financial questions, I don't get the answers in the recruitment process. It's very vague. And you have to do that yourself, really, whether it's going to company house and getting all the financial details. But you want that solid fact base. I mean, we did it at Barclays. You have to start with a really solid fact base before you put any recommendations forward. And I think that would be very, very useful as a bedrock before you go into the organization. So when you're having your meetings with your key stakeholders, your dialogue with them is from a place of you're informed. You've got that solid fact base. Yeah.
I mean, you often get more information when you're buying a house in terms of disclosure than you will do when you're taking up a new position. Robin, you said earlier on, I think Ed said earlier on about the fact that actually it is all about some early wins. As a communications expert, how does one go about communicating those early wins without looking to be either arrogant or, you know, I'm the new person around here and I'm trying to basically make a name for myself? How do you get that tonally right?
Well, it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot to be said for bathing in the glory of your colleagues. So, you know, if there's a win that's been scored by a member of your team, then, you know, let them take forward and take the credit, and you're credited by association. That plays very well internally. We see there are times where you just have to blow your own trumpet, particularly in organizations where you might be the first marketer they've ever hired, or the first marketer with that level of seniority. And part of what you're doing is making the case for marketing and advocating for the role of marketing more generally. So, you know, it depends. It depends on the nature of the success. But you know, if you're sort of thinking about what you're doing as sort of partly making the case for yourself and partly making the case for marketing, particularly in these firms where marketing's less well established as a discipline, then you do have to be quite explicit and land the message.
Thank you, Ed. PE-backed businesses, venture capital-backed businesses, very often they will actually be responsible for placing certainly the CEO into an organization what they've invested in. And sometimes if it's a board level appointment, the CMO. Do you find that in those instances you get more clarity than would otherwise be the case from a conventional business that's, you know, backed by shareholders?
So I think, you know, kind of VC businesses, especially the early stages, are pretty flat. So there's, you know, senior people that have been placed. There's often kind of tie-ins with kind of other kind of industry expertise, which they've had before. Often there's, you know, within the networks, there's ties there, so you can get a bit of kind of background and understanding about individuals from that. So yeah, I also think in terms of, the from those kind of startup stage, or at least early stage, up until kind of Series A, there's a lot of change going on, even kind of pivoting in business models as as they decide where they are and how they can then kind of scale up to the next stage. So there's interesting kind of factors that need to be considered as you're coming into a role in that way. I think to your point there, you kind of asked Robin. I think having the right engagement with those individuals and the kind of senior stakeholders are really important. It's also kind of speaking the language as quickly as you can, and the way that's been engaged, even down to like the classic acronyms that you have when you join any organization. Getting up to speed and understanding those is really hugely important. I think as well is building relationships with individuals, kind of senior stakeholders, where projects overlap. So, say, for example, where you're understanding the kind of full customer journey, there may be a CTO that looks after the actual product itself. Understanding how users are using that product and having that depth of understanding and data is hugely powerful to then consider how you're going to market and engage from the early stages and those early touch points. So I think that's really important as well. But yeah, as I say, VC early stage, there's lots of moving parts. So it becomes sometimes even more challenging to be able to understand how things are sitting within an organization when you join.
Okay. I mean, do you have any kind of classic examples, maybe where you've worked in organizations as strategies you've adopted in the first 100 days, or any stories that actually have demonstrated what works and perhaps also what doesn't work?
Yeah, sure. I've started quite recently at a kind of fintech business, and it's super niche. So it's for a piece of software for traders of commodities. So this is a world that I'm certainly not completely familiar with, even though I've worked in a number of different fintech businesses. So what has been really useful since I've started is really getting under the skin of customers, and we've had the luxury, I suppose, to be involved in a process of customer interviews, which is so insightful in understanding how your true advocates are using the product, but also kind of where there's been other kind of barriers to sale. And so that insight to customers and having those conversations is really powerful as well. It's a flat organization, as it classically is, but they are recruiting and hiring quite quickly into sales roles. So again, understanding how the flow of kind of lead generation, MQL to SQL, different kind of touch points and kind of attribution of sale, even the kind of the MarTech and sales tech stack, HubSpot, Salesforce, understanding how all that works as quickly as possible has been really important to then understand, well, where are we going to be spending the marketing dollars and where are we going to get the returns? In terms of that classic, what can be done to get some early wins? So working towards a kind of LinkedIn direct outreach strategy, which ties nicely with kind of with SDRs that are going to be in role. You often get very early and quick feedback from that, but you can see if there's a lever to be pulled quite quickly at a quite cheap level of cost and quick attribution. And from that, from those learnings and what we've seen so far, there's some green shoots that you can then pass back up to the C-suite, and in this case, the founders, get more confidence, which will enable you to get more marketing budget built into a wider plan and start going after kind of wider areas. I think the other thing to maybe to shout about is often the case with partnerships as well in that case. So where you can see partnerships where there's either traffic or there's leads coming through that have higher levels of social proof and engagement, and they're more likely to convert. Again, easy to get those over the line, get some leads. This is obviously a B2B case. There's an opportunity there. In terms of, warts and all, discussions, what's been a challenge, it's certainly, working with founders. I'm not sure if people work with early stage here, but founders and co-founders can always be interesting, and working that political minefield and maze is often interesting as well, and staying on both sides to make sure you're putting your side of the story forward, but also supporting their vision and where they want the company to take. I think that's often very challenging, especially at early stages in the role. Hopefully that can grant some light.
No, that's a great insight. Make sure you don't back the wrong horse, back all the horses in the first 100 days at least.
Just to follow on from Ed, well, all of the discussions that we've had over the past sort of 10 minutes or so, because what's quite interesting is we spent a lot of time talking about communicating internally, understanding stakeholders, understanding where the money comes from, the fundamentals of the business. All of that is a huge amount of homework to do. But there's also the work, right? You know, stuff's got to go out into the market. We've got to be educating customers. We've got to be showing them that the business understands their needs. You know, that's narrative, that's positioning, that's content, testing and learning. You know, those early wins aren't going to come around by themselves. And so all of that's got to happen too. So if for sort of a new entrant CMO to have, they've got to be spinning all of those plates, right, alongside all of the other stuff. And so what we often see happens is, you know, we'll get brought in alongside someone who's new in role who just says, I've got a wonderful team that's great at like executing campaigns, knows HubSpot backwards, very talented graphic designers, copies all over the place. Help me plug that gap. Let's get some stuff up. We've got to keep the wheels in motion, because it's not like the whole machine can go on pause while you're doing your discovery and your interviews and your groundwork and what have you. So what we're seeing there is this sort of trend towards, like, you could call it talent on demand, intelligent hands, sort of what we do, which is sort of providing a bit of a ratchet effect to marketers' ability to execute, particularly in that first 100 days when their minds are so much focused, so rightly focused on, you know, building relationships inside the business.
That's a good shout, Robin. And the reality is, as you rightly say, you've got so many different stakeholders and taskmasters, and as you say, you've got to get the job done. I mean, Caitlin, we talked about kind of managing stakeholders, and if you take both the Chubb example and then compare it with Hoare, which I think is an unusual cultural organisation to say the least. But I'd just be quite interested in maybe just a war story and the learning from your experience at Hoare as to how you dealt with essentially a family business.
Well, I think, you know, when you go in, yes, you've got to keep the plates spinning. And I think I always go back to films. Do you remember Gladiator? And Russell Crowe goes into that gladiator environment and he goes, we've got a better chance facing what's coming at us together. So I think, you know, in my first early days, it's sort of, you know, make friends with your team, your existing team. You're probably going to do some organizational changes to that team, but you know, when you arrive, that's the team you've got. So make friends with them and bring out the best you can in your existing team to keep those plates spinning. I find that I normally have to stop a few mad activity. You know, I stop some stuff. But other than that, I don't radically change stuff in my first few months. You know, you keep everything on track while you're also doing, as Robin said, you know, your discovery. And yes, I think, you know, those first sort of few months are a baptism of fire because you've got to quickly get a sense of the jungle. You've got to get a sense of who's the lion, where does the influence. You know, Hawes was it was a distinct culture. It really was. You know, it was very old family. And even within the old family, there were some real lions. And then there were some more meek members of the family that were just going to agree. And then there were the main decision makers. So you had to get a real sense very quickly of who were the people where the decisions were going to lie and how were you going to get them on board, and what were the ways of engagement that they wanted, not the ways of engagement that you wanted, the ways of engagement that they wanted. So, and that's going to be unique in every single, you know, company. Companies like Chubb, a lot easier. very corporate, steering committees, terms of reference, really easy to fall into that. Let's set up a steering committee. Let's meet weekly. Hawes was a unique culture. China cups and cups of tea and afternoon chats. So you just have to adapt to the culture of the organization in order to get the decisions that you need. So
that's good. That's great advice.
Yeah.
That's great advice. I've got questions coming in now, which is great. So thank you. Please let's have your questions. The first one is from Sam Grant, and this one's probably directed to you, Peter. If the lifespan of a CMO is so low, 1.7 years, and the number of open roles are so low at the moment, does that mean the roles are being filled internally through network, or is it the CMO role? Is it beginning to disappear?
Well, I think that the CMO is definitely evolving. I think it's evolving more than anything else, and what is required is evolving literally month on month. But that is one point that sort of alluded to earlier. That a lot of these roles won't see the light of day, based on it might be a replacement role. They might not want someone to it'd be out in the market that they're looking. So a lot of the roles that we recruit at that C-suite level are either under an NDA and or sort of under the radar, basically. So they will land and they'll just be with one agency or one headhunter, or even, they might just do it sort of internally potentially. So, and there's also, you might apply for the role and you might think, what, I'm absolutely perfect for this, in the right area, for the right experience, right level, but you don't know what has actually happened or who is involved in the process, whether there's been referrals, whether there's an internal candidate. So there's a lot of frustration with BT candidates that when they don't get response from companies, we pride ourselves on, if everyone comes to us, we will respond, give them, complete sort of openness, because we're assigned to that particular position. But there is a lot of the cases that, that the roles literally just won't see the light of day, and they'll just be under an NDA. And the candidates that are being targeted, because there will be specific requirements from either the MD or owners, there'll be a small pool will be targeted, interviewed, and they'll be placed before you can see it happen.
Okay. One more question. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, that's all good. Yeah.
So I've got an kind of adjacent question to you before we go back. This one's from Alex Pilkington. Thank you, Alex. He was talking about the rise of the fractional CMO and how they apparently are becoming more popular, and whether that's because companies can't either afford a full-time CMO or they're risk averse given actually the economic times we're in. Are you seeing a bit of that? Are you seeing a rise?
Yeah, there is a small rise. I mean, I think there are some candidates who are available immediately. So some candidates are taking advantage of that by bringing people in for short-term projects. But yeah, as we've alluded to, I think this year, various different impacts across, worldwide, political, whatever it might look like. We are seeing green shoots, and we've worked with quite a lot of VC-backed companies, PE-backed companies that are, they do have money and they are investing. And I think next year and the end of this year will hopefully be a lot better than this year. And that's what we are seeing. So, yeah, I think people have taken advantage of that this year, based on quite a lot of people in the market are actually available immediately.
Okay, thank you. It's a general question for everyone, really, which is, as fingers crossed the market improves and we see a recovery both in terms of client spend and then people to sort of generate and manage that spend, i.e. more CMOs, how can prospect CMOs or those people looking for jobs at the moment, how can they best ensure they're well positioned for the next phase and growth in the market? What should you be doing now? Anyone?
Just Stephen, happy to kind of touch on, I suppose, kind of personal brand and position yourself there. So I think that as recruiters, obviously, kind of Peter's kind of working with people. You have the recruiting managers or the kind of other members reviewing or looking at you and seeing how you operate. I think there's a huge part of that involves looking at the individual and seeing the kind of background and what they're worth. Now, I think the classic platform that people will go to is kind of LinkedIn for that. The classic level of how you set up your profile and how you position yourself in terms of your skill set and your background and your experience, I think is really important, and even kind of taking the time to position yourself in the best light for that. But there's obviously kind of wider steps that you can take to position yourself to have thought leadership around a particular industry, to engage with peers within the industry that might position you in the best light, and to be involved putting out content that you think that positions you favorably. Because I think in the days of looking at a cold CV, there may be quite a lot of outside of your history and the experience that you've had and what you've had in terms of achievements. There'll be a kind of level playing field and table stakes involved in that. And the next step is, how are you shining and how you are engaging wider than that to position yourself to say, well, this person's a step up and beyond. They can both be a leader to their team. They can be on the cutting edge there in terms of what other people are thinking, and be tapping into that kind of wider engagement and audience. But also then to have that other network to bring in expertise when they come into the role to deliver the best possible outcomes for the business. So I think that's pretty important, if that makes sense.
As a recruiter, Peter, when you're looking at talent, and inevitably you will be looking through both LinkedIn, and I guess you'll be looking at all of their social feeds as part of your assessment. It's something perhaps as either fractional CMOs or CMOs, people don't necessarily spend enough time actually managing their social profiles or managing their brand. And I guess of increasingly importance. I mean, do people through that process that get sifted out if they don't have much of a presence, if they're not actively in the community with a point of view, is it something that you would basically mark against them?
Yeah, so it's twofold really. From so picking up on a few points is your personal brand is massive, and it's how active you are, and also LinkedIn, as you discussed, obviously, that is obviously a very good tool to use, and they change their algorithms quite frequently in terms of, I suppose who's at the top, who's at the highest, who's at the top. So how active you are, what content you put out, what type of content you put out is important. How active you are is huge. I mean, it's a database, right? So there's a lot of big companies that will yes come to specialists for us for particular roles, but also they will do their own thing as well. So how much you put on there and how you articulate yourself is massive. And you do see quite a lot of candidates that I speak to, really senior candidates, and they go, I've not even updated my LinkedIn. I've not even really looked at it. And you go on and they've literally just got one line of, where they are currently, and they've not even got the recent role on. So if you are potentially active or passive even, it can take 6 to 9 months to actually find quite a senior role. So even if you're looking to potentially land a role in end of 2025, you probably want to start, updating your current profile now. And I'd probably look at it more of as an impact statement rather than this is where I work and this is the job I've got. This is more of an impact. What have you done? What have you delivered? How have you delivered it? To what time frame? If you can't put figures on there, put percentages on there. What percentage uplift have you provided? What, who have you managed? The basic things that you think, that you just go, well, I'm not going to put that on because, obviously I've done a digital transformation, but people will need to see that. I will obviously look at your profile and understand it probably a little bit more deeper than potentially someone in an internal recruitment role, but in a business. But you do need to be quite blatant with it, and quite black and white with it sometimes to get to make sure you're at the top of the tree.
That sounds all very factual, and obviously you'd expect that someone's kind of laying out your CV and demonstrating your past successes. But beyond that, presumably also there's an opportunity to have a point of view. And I suppose if you're targeting a particular industry or targeting a group of companies, it's important to link in with key individuals in those organizations and also have a point of view on that industry, I guess. Yeah,
the content that you put out there is massive. And I think do reach out and do connect with people that a lot of people don't do enough of linking in with the people that they're working with, because it does open the door to potential openings and opportunities.
Kind of do's and don'ts, Caitlin. Kind of those, I think, experiences, sort of content that you perhaps don't want to put out there, or points of view.
I'm guilty of being one of these people that don't, as Peter said, I'm one of the marketeers that prefer to market a company rather than myself, and so I'll put my hands up as if I look at most of the assignments I get, they're through my personal network, and I am one of those people that need to do more in this. And, I was talking to Ed before it. I'm one of those people that go, oh God, cringe whenever I start to think about do your own content calendar, think about it in advance, plan ahead, think about what are your passions, what are you passionate about, talk about it, have a conversation. Do I do it for myself? I know that, my own personal network, going to events, when I press the flesh, that's where I get my assignments. That's where I get people going, God, can you help me? But through the digital sphere, I need to actually take my own medicine. So
that's interesting. It's fair enough. When on previous calls, when we've been speaking to CMOs, they've said most of their positions have gone through private networks and people they know, and they get referred because they've done a good job. But I guess it feels a little bit like, what the advice we give to our clients is, which, regardless of actually how you generate leads into your business, you need to have a shop front, and actually if LinkedIn is the shop front, then I guess it's about maintenance and being a good retailer and always having a presence out there. Robin, about you, are you an avid marketeer of yourself and your services within your business, or are you another person who's kind of keeping it in the closet and not telling anyone?
Personally, I'm a bit more on the modest side than the screaming about myself. My feed is a bit too full of like colleagues and friends in the industry sort of doing lots of humble bragging. Went for a coffee with so and so, here's a selfie, that sort of thing, great. But I do think Ed and Peter are absolutely right on the subject of having a point of view on the industries that you're interested in. If you've got some material that's published, as you say, on Storefront that you can point people to, then that does speak volumes. If you if you're meeting people at events, and the logical first step is the hookup via LinkedIn, and there's lots of interesting content and links to posts and shares and that sort of thing, then that's valuable too. My sort of addendum to Ed's point about building up the material you talk about on LinkedIn and the topics that you cover and industries and so on is, by all means, do all of that, but then activate your networks around it, so that pretty much every time you meet someone, you're following up with a LinkedIn request, and if at all possible, getting email addresses and doing it via other means. I mean, there are lots and lots of organizations, not just agencies, but people on their own, using tools like MailChimp and stuff to do just closed circulation emails to growing databases of people, and you sort of build a name for yourself as a publisher as much as a marketer.
Well, that's sound advice. I mean, Peter, are there things that we should be putting in our communications that are going to be appealing to specific attributes that hiring committees are currently kind of looking for in future CMOs?
I suppose it depends. It does depend on who you're targeting, what type of industry, what type of sector, what type of role. Your pathway, your journey to where you are now, what you've actually done. It's more. I think it's more what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, because you want it to be directed to that, rather than just sort of applying or engaging with companies just because there's potential roles there. So I've had people even target companies if they're into I don't know, a particular type of food or a particular type of industry, actually targeting companies directly themselves. So yeah, I would be quite open to looking at what you're interested in and focusing on that, and what your background is in.
I guess, I mean, we talked about LinkedIn and the importance of LinkedIn as kind of the business social platform, but equally too, you're going to be looking at Insta, X, TikTok, Facebook. So one has to remember, obviously, that anything you do in social is there forever. So unless you go back and go through your various different profiles and various different social platforms. And if necessary, if you need to kind of clean them up, as it were, it's always, a sound bit of editing is always required in some instances, and something that's worth looking into, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that we would look at, but there have been situations where potential owners, of businesses, normally smaller businesses, where potentially the impact of hiring the wrong person is greater to them, whether it works or not. They have gone into a little bit more detail in terms of they looked at their socials, that what's available, and commented on them, and asked me to probe. But there's nothing that we would look at specifically. But things like X, that if you're commenting quite freely on that and it's quite close to the bone, that could have an impact potentially, historically.
I had a great one last week. This was a general manager for a hotel, and this guy was uniquely well positioned for this role, was absolutely the right candidate. And the owner turned around and basically he'd been through numerous presentations and had numerous interviews, and was just at the offer stage. And then the owner kind of stepped in the last moment and said that he had bad feng shui, and therefore he wasn't going to get the gig. So there'll always be things that are beyond your control, I'm afraid, when it comes to getting a gig. But the ones that you can control, it's actually worth putting some energy and some time into that before perhaps you go out onto the market. In the same way as you prepare your house before you put it up for sale, you just got to think of it like that. It's a product. You're the product. You're the brand. John Ray, question from you. Actually, I might bring you in for this one, John, if you're there. I can find you on the and unmute you, bring you in if I may.
Yeah, it was just going back to what Peter was presenting earlier about the tenure of CMOs, and I was just wondering if that's the sort of expected lifetime of a CEO, or if they haven't achieved what they were expected to achieve by the leadership in that time frame, and so are given the boot, or if they've just done what they needed to do in terms of the change, and actually that was, diminishing returns by keeping them on.
Yeah, so it's a mixture of both, really. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some people that I've worked with for years that are 6, 7, 8 years, and they're still CMOs or senior people within the business. So it's not one shoe fits all. I suppose it's a type of business. So if there's some smaller business that are in a really, really sort of speedy growth period, or going through some form of acquisition or some event, sometimes they're only required for a particular amount of time to actually be part of that transition. So it's almost like a long-term fractional role. Almost, it's like, well, I'm coming in, having this impact, and then leaving, and it's almost discussed. But it's almost discussed. During that process, that it's probably going to be 2.5 years. Or it's probably going to be 3 years. But then, yes, there are situations where people get headhunted, move because they're doing a good job, and people can see that they can pull them and actually bring them into their business. So there's various different sort of reasons why people will be, but there's no sort of one main strain, if you like. I think obviously the figures are pulled down clearly. There are some people that I've worked with that have been a CMO in a business for a long time.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, we've got 5 minutes left. If anyone's got any burning questions, please do take the opportunity to ask them now. Otherwise, I'll go to a final question from myself. I'll just give you the chance. Well, I guess the final question is, first of all, relating to the fact that hopefully the market is going to tick up, and actually one of the things that actually as marketeers I want to ask the question is, what do you think you can do to make yourself more available and actually more sellable in this marketplace where things have been slow, and there's not much demand at the moment in the market? What would you suggest you do in order to make yourself more available and more sellable to anyone?
Go first, shall I? Have a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And don't be shy about sharing it. If you've got deep interest in a particular industry, or in a particular discipline of marketing, perhaps around performance or brand or whatever, then do write about it, do talk about it, and most importantly, do share that.
Ed?
Yeah, no, I mean, there are certain trends that are kind of that are happening, and that probably will accelerate in 2025. I mean, obviously the buzzword is AI, but it will have quite a massive impact to a lot of different parts of the marketing team. Some of which maybe can be discounted or is kind of futuristic in thinking. Some which are happening now. Having at least a level of understanding of that and how it's going to impact things, I think is pretty important. So I think that it's really important to get that right. And even just be experimenting with the tools, we understand how to then speak to specialists when you do it. But I think the only other point I would say with all that and all the technology and focus on digital, I think the other thing is just around how you tell the story for that brand and how you have content that kind of resonates is just as important. And I think that sometimes that's not necessarily considered when you're kind of shouting about just key metrics and things like that. So if you go into that interview and really understand what the business is trying to do with that customer and understand that and how you can tell the story, I think that will get a lot of cut through with those discussions.
Thank you. Sound advice. Storytelling, understanding that business, and also having a handle on technological developments like AI. Caitlin?
I would say, and invest in yourself as well. Never stop learning. So as I've been, in between and looking, I'm also investing in myself with extra learning and extra knowledge. So yes, I've got 30 years of knowledge, but everything's always changing and always moving, so you can always carry on learning.
You never stop learning. I totally agree on that one. And finally, from yourself, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I would. I know you, Kat, you mentioned it's not something you want to do, but certainly look. If you are in that space, invest time in how you're positioned, your personal brand, and the content you put out there, and what you're doing on the various different platforms, because that is what people will look at. You might look at your CV. They might go, yeah, I might know that person yet, but it's the first thing they'll look at. So make sure that's up to date, up to speed, and actually shows what impact you've had.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much to our panel today, and thank you for all of us joining us. It's been great to have you all here. I think there's some real key output from today. But first of all, market's tight. You need to be therefore more on the front foot. You need to market yourself. You need to be conscious of the sectors you're targeting. You need to be up to date with new technologies and new approaches and have a point of view. And you need to use all mediums available for you to be able to actually build that brand, reach out and connect with those different companies that you could be interested in, work with the recruiters, and have a plan, have a 100-day plan. Before you join that company, be really clear about what you need to achieve in the first 100 days, both in terms of internal communications, developing those relationships with C-suite, developing the relationships with your team. And the reality, it doesn't matter whether you are a full-time or whether you are being brought in on an interim basis, the gig's the same and the expectations are similar. And the life expectancy, as you can see, is 1.7 years. So all your jobs to make sure we stretch that next year to at least 2 years and then beyond. It's still a great job. It's still great fun. And you still get to work with great people, and occasionally they give you budget. So thanks for joining us. We look forward to our next session on Marketing Spice Live. But for now, have a great day. Bye-bye.